A storm brews over the forest. The sky was a cruel grey that afternoon, the kind of ominous shade that warned the earth something terrible was coming. Winds twisted through the thick canopy of the forest, swaying treetops like ocean waves, howling like distant wolves. Leaves flew through the air like frantic birds, spiraling down into muddy puddles. The air felt charged, electric and restless. A storm was on its way, and everything in the forest knew it. A doe sprinted across the clearing, her fawn in tow, both desperate to reach the shelter of the trees. Birds had long abandoned the skies, their songs silenced. Even the insects, usually relentless, were quiet as if nature itself was holding its breath. But beneath all of this eerie stillness, deeper in the belly of the woods, a different kind of sound echoed through the trunks of towering oaks and pines. Not a growl, not a cry, a clinking metal against bark. Bound to the rough trunk of an ancient oak was Lucas Hale, a seasoned forest ranger in his mid-40s. His uniform, usually crisp and clean, was torn, muddied and soaked through. His strong frame, once a symbol of authority and safety for those who hiked or camped within the forest's reach, now slumped like a broken puppet. His hands were twisted painfully behind his back, secured with rusted iron chains, the links biting into his skin. Blood, mixed with rain and sweat, streaked his face, and his eyes fluttered, struggling to stay open. The storm had caught him hours ago, not just in weather, but in fate. What had started as a routine patrol turned into something much darker. He had woken up that morning with a sense of purpose. Reports had come in about illegal hunting, poachers laying steel traps that maimed and killed wildlife indiscriminately. It wasn't the first time, and Lucas, being who he was, couldn't ignore it. With his ranger badge pinned firm to his chest and his walkie secured at his hip, he had ventured into the deeper forest, where few dared go, alone. He never expected they would be waiting for him. The ambush came quickly. A tripwire, a blow to the head, masked men, figures he couldn't identify. They had known his route. They had prepared. They beat him with batons, took his radio, and threw his phone into the ravine. Lucas had fought hard, but he was outnumbered, and in the end they had dragged him to this tree like a discarded thing, chaining him like an animal and laughing as they walked away. "Let the animals deal with you. Hero," one of them spat. "Now." His lips were cracked, his body trembling, his consciousness slipping in and out like a faulty light switch. Rain poured down relentlessly, soaking the already saturated earth, turning the forest floor into a slick, freezing swamp. Lucas could barely feel his fingers. Every breath he took burned in his chest. Every twitch sent jolts of pain through his body. His legs had long since gone numb, and his mind was clouded in a fog of pain, cold and confusion. "Help!" He croaked once, though there was no one to hear it, or so he thought, because far away, just beyond the thicket, past the rotting logs and tangled brambles, two sets of eyes gleamed in the dim light. German shepherds, lean, muscular and alert, watched from the shadows. One male, one female. Their coats were matted with mud, their ears twitched with every gust of wind. Strays, but not entirely wild. Their names, though long forgotten by the world, were Bruno and Sasha. They had no collars, no owners. They belonged to no one, except maybe, once, they had belonged to him. Months ago, Lucas had found them near a collapsed den, pups then, malnourished and scared. He had brought them to the ranger cabin, fed them, cleaned their wounds, and slowly earned their trust. But he knew the forest was their true home. After a time he had let them go, free to roam, yet something had remained between them, a silent bond, a memory of gentleness, of safety. And somehow, despite the time and the storm, they had found him again. Sasha took a tentative step forward, sniffing the wind. Bruno remained still, his ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the slumped form chained to the tree. They could smell his blood. They could hear the shallow rasp of his breath. Recognition sparked, subtle, yet certain. This was no stranger. This was him, the one who had once whispered kind words and shared his food, the one who had cradled them when they were too weak to walk. Lightning flashed across the sky in a jagged tear, illuminating the battered man's face for a moment. Then something in Sasha stirred. She moved forward, a low whine escaping her throat. Bruno followed, less certain but unwilling to let her go alone. Together they approached the tree cautiously, sniffing the air, their instincts battling concern. Lucas stirred. His eyes opened, glazed with exhaustion. But then, a flicker of something new. Hope. "Sasha," he rasped, barely audible. "Bruno, is that you?" A soft whimper answered him. Sasha nuzzled his boot, licking the leather gently. Bruno circled once, then sat beside him, keeping watch. He barked, not loud, but firm. A warning, a signal. The forest had abandoned its voice, but these two hadn't. The storm raged above, tearing at the trees and flooding the trails. But beneath the old oak, something beautiful was beginning. 2 German shepherds had heard the forest cry, and they had answered, not as strays, but as guardians. A devoted forest guardian, long before the storm, before the chains, and before the cruel laughter of poachers echoed through the trees. Lucas Hale had made a quiet promise to the forest, not in grand speeches or dramatic oaths, but in the quiet routines of a man who cared too deeply to walk away. He had come to these woods fresh out of military service, trading the noise of war for the serenity of birdsong and pine needles underfoot. To many, he was just a park ranger, but to the animals, the trees and the trails, he was something else, a guardian, a keeper of balance, a quiet protector. Every morning, long before the sun touched the treetops, Lucas would lace up his boots, fill his thermos with black coffee, and set off down narrow dirt paths that wound like veins through the dense forest. He knew every bend, every hollow tree, every fox den and squirrel nest. Children from nearby towns knew him as Mr. Lucas, the forest man. He'd show them how to spot deer tracks and identify bird calls. When a bird fell from its nest, Lucas was the one who carefully returned it. When a fawn was found crying beside its lifeless mother, killed by a trap, Lucas would cradle it in his arms and promise in whispers that it wouldn't be alone. But not all who walked these woods had hearts like Lucas. He had fought poachers before, men who saw profit in cruelty, who snapped the legs of animals with hidden traps or left snares that choked the life out of anything unlucky enough to wander into them. Lucas knew the signs: broken branches, unnatural clearings, blood where there should be none. He filed reports, removed traps by the dozens, and patrolled aggressively. Some poachers were caught and fined, others vanished deeper into the forest, angry and vengeful. They began to mark him, not just as a nuisance, but as a threat to their business, and yet he never stopped. Months ago, when he'd stumbled across 2 tiny German shepherd puppies, trembling under the corpse of their mother, shot and left to rot, Lucas didn't hesitate. He'd wrapped them in his jacket, whispering words he hadn't spoken in years. "You're safe now," he said, pressing them gently against his chest. Their eyes, wide and filled with fear, had slowly blinked, closed in the warmth of his arms. He named them Sasha and Bruno. At the ranger cabin, he nursed them back to health, feeding them mashed venison and soft bread. Sasha had been the curious one, always testing the limits. Bruno was more reserved, always observing, always watching. Lucas with quiet, questioning eyes. In time they grew stronger. They began to run, to chase squirrels, to bark at shadows, and eventually they returned to the wild. Lucas never tried to tame them. He knew some souls belonged to the forest more than to any man. Still, he left out scraps every week, just in case. So when reports came in of new poaching activity, more aggressive, more organized, Lucas didn't hesitate. He read the coordinates scrawled on a crumpled anonymous note. Near Devil's Hollow. Trap set! Dangerous! Most would have waited for backup, but Lucas had dealt with this before. He believed in swift action. He believed he knew his forest well enough to handle it. He left at dawn, whistling softly as he passed the old pine that split like a forked tongue. The birds were quiet that morning, not silent, just uneasy. A subtle shift he couldn't quite place. He pushed deeper, the wind picking up behind him, his boots crunching damp leaves. He found the traps all right. Dozens of them. Cruel, jagged steel teeth half buried in the earth, some already blooded. One still held the mangled paw of a rabbit, twitching faintly. Lucas's stomach turned. He knelt down, disarming one with steady fingers. "You monsters," he muttered, under his breath. He'd barely stood back up when a snap cracked behind him. Too late, a blow struck the side of his head. The world spun, then another. Figures, dark, masked, laughing. He fought back, striking one in the gut with his elbow, but another caught him across the jaw with a bat. The last thing he remembered before slipping into darkness was the harsh clang of metal and the suffocating sound of chains. Now, hours later, chained and broken, the cold rain eating into his bones, Lucas wondered if this was where it ended. Not in battle, not in a blaze of glory, but alone. Forgotten, chained like an animal to the very forest he loved. The irony stung more than the wounds. His mind drifted through fog. He thought of the children he'd taught to build shelters, of the mother bear he'd once helped out of a trap, risking his life to free her. He thought of Sasha and Bruno, those tiny pups nestled against his chest, safe and trembling. Would anyone find him? He tried again to call out, "Help!" His voice cracked, broken and swallowed by the storm. But something moved in the distance. Leaves rustled, not in the rhythm of the wind, but with purpose. Footsteps, light, careful. He forced his swollen eyes open. Two shapes, low to the ground, ears pointed, eyes watching, Sasha and Bruno. It was impossible, but there they were, real, soaked, and staring straight at him. For a moment, Lucas thought he was hallucinating, but when Sasha whimpered and Bruno let out a sharp, urgent bark, he knew the forest hadn't forgotten him. The ones he had once saved had come to return the favor. Ambushed and chained, Lucas had never known fear like this, not even in his years overseas, not when he heard bullets cracking past his ears in the desert heat. Fear, he had learned, was different when it came slowly, when it grew like a parasite. Inside your chest, whispering this might be the end. Now, with the cold soaking through his skin and his wrists shredded raw by the rusted chain, fear was eating him alive. His mouth was too dry to swallow. His head throbbed from where the poachers had struck him, and his arms, twisted behind the tree, were long past numb. Every now and then he drifted out of consciousness, only to jerk awake, muscles spasming from the cold. When he managed to stay awake, all he could do was stare at the forest, hoping, hallucinating, but they were real, Sasha and Bruno. The pair moved like shadows through the trees. Sasha whined again, stepping cautiously toward Lucas. Her head tilted in confusion, concern. She could smell the blood on him, the iron tang sharp in the air. Bruno, ever watchful, sniffed the perimeter, circling wide, alert to movement. Then he trotted back to Lucas, barked once, sharp, commanding, almost as if to say, "Stay awake, we're here now." Lucas's heart thudded. You came," he managed to rasp. The words cracked from his mouth like dry twigs. Sasha gently pawed it. The chain, her nails clicking against the metal. Bruno growled low, directed at the chain itself, not Lucas. They could sense the danger, the wrongness. Something was holding down the man who had once fed them from his own plate, who had tucked them in with an old army blanket when the wind. howled through the ranger station. Sasha sniffed at the base of the tree, then tried to dig at the soil beneath the chain. Bruno joined her, but it was futile. The chain was thick and looped tightly through a metal bolt, driven deep into the trunk. It wasn't something the dogs could bite through or paw loose. Still, they tried, over and over, barking, digging, tugging. Lucas fought to stay awake. The world flickered in and out like a dying lantern. He remembered flashes from the ambush, gravel voices behind black masks, heavy boots trampling undergrowth, a metallic click before the blow to the head. He remembered the lead poacher, a man with a deep scar that twisted his upper lip into a permanent sneer. "You should have stayed in your cabin, Ranger," the man had said. "You think you can save everything in these woods? Save yourself first." Then came the chains, not ropes, chains. They weren't planning for him to get free. They didn't want him found, and they didn't expect anything or anyone to come. Looking, but they hadn't counted on 2 forgotten German shepherds. Bruno stopped barking and pressed his snout close to Lucas's ear. He nudged him, firm and steady, trying to keep him awake. Lucas shivered and leaned his head back against the tree. He could barely move. The rain was lighter now, but the cold remained, sharp as needles in his chest. Sasha, muddy and desperate, sat down and howled, a long, mournful sound that cut through the forest like a blade. She howled again. Bruno picked up the call, and far off, faint but real, another bark answered. Lucas blinked. Was he imagining it? No. It came again. A deep bark, then 2 sharp ones, then silence, then again. Another dog. No, several. Hope flared in Lucas's chest. Somewhere, not too far away, there was a response. It wasn't human, but it was alive. Sasha and Bruno immediately reacted, ears perked, tails twitching, pacing rapidly in a circle before bolting toward the sound. Lucas wanted to scream for them not to leave. Fear clawed at his throat. What if they didn't come back? But then he remembered who they were. Not pets, not wild animals either. They were his, and he was theirs. They were going for help. The minutes that followed dragged like hours. Lucas drifted in and out of consciousness again, the pain in his shoulders now dull and distant, his lips numb. The forest shifted around him, darker but strangely quieter, like it too was watching and waiting. Suddenly, something cracked in the underbrush. Lucas jerked awake. He saw movement, shadows. Human-sized. Was it a rescuer? A hiker? No. The figures stepped into the clearing, and he recognized them instantly. The poachers, 3 of them. Same dark clothing, same cruel eyes. "Well, well," said the one with the scarred lip, grinning as he approached. "Still alive. Tough bastard." Lucas tried to straighten up, to speak, to defy them, but nothing came out. "We figured the animals would find you," another said, "or the storm would do the job. But I guess we'll have to finish it ourselves." The leader drew a long hunting knife. "Can't have any heroes ruining our business." He stepped forward, but before the knife could fall, a low snarl echoed from the trees. Sasha. She leapt from the darkness with a fury Lucas had never seen. She barreled into the knife-wielding man, knocking him back with surprising force. Her teeth sank into his arm as he screamed. Blood spattered the leaves. Before the others could react, Bruno lunged from behind, clamping down on another poacher's leg. The forest erupted in chaos. Men shouted. Dogs growled and bit with precision, trained not by obedience school, but by instinct and memory. They fought for the man who had saved them, who had given them a chance at life. They fought not like strays, but like warriors. The poachers didn't stand a chance. Sasha's jaws found the knife and tore it from the leader's grip. Bruno drove the second man into a tree. The third, terrified, turned and ran blindly into the forest. Sasha barked wildly, staying near Lucas. Bruno stood guard, his chest heaving, blood on his snout, but none of it his. Lucas, barely conscious, smiled. "My good, brave kids." And then, in the distance, the crunch of tires on wet leaves, headlights through the trees. Help had arrived. The rescue mission. The blinding headlights cut through the forest gloom like beacons from another world. Lucas, barely conscious, could only squint into the glowing light as figures emerged, real this time. Not phantoms, not threats, but rescuers. Over. "Here!" a voice shouted. "Dear God, he's chained. Bring the bolt cutters." Through his fogged vision, Lucas recognized one of them, Officer Danny Perez, a wildlife enforcement officer and former trainee under him. She dropped to her knees beside him, her gloved hands gently cupping his blood-caked face. "Lucas, can you hear me? It's Danny. You're safe now. We've got you." Lucas tried to answer, but only a faint rasp escaped his throat. His body had gone limp, beyond exhaustion. Still, in the swirling pain and cold, a flicker of relief sparked in his chest. He wasn't going to die out here, not forgotten, not alone. Danny turned to the others. "Cut him loose, carefully. His left shoulder looks dislocated." The tools clamped onto the rusted chain. With a sharp crack and a metallic snap, the first link gave way. Bruno, standing beside Lucas like a sentinel, growled softly when the bolt cutters moved too close. Danny raised a hand to him calmly. "It's okay, boy. We're helping." Sasha stood just behind Bruno, her ears alert, her coat muddy and soaked. But her eyes never left Lucas. She watched every movement, silent, guarding. When the last of the chain fell away, Lucas slumped forward into Danny's arms. "Easy," she whispered, easing him to the ground. A medic rushed forward and began checking his vitals. Lucas winced as they touched his bruised ribs and bandaged the deep abrasion across his wrist. Severe hypothermia, dehydrated. "Likely a concussion," the medic said, voice tight with concern. "We need to get him to the truck, now." As they worked to stabilize Lucas, more officers appeared, securing the area, setting up lights. 2 poachers were already in custody, one nursing a mangled arm, the other handcuffed with a broken leg. The third was still on the run, but a K9 unit had been dispatched to track him. The dogs were the heroes of the hour. Officers who had seen the bloody scuffle, the torn clothing and ripped sleeves on the poachers, couldn't believe their ears when Danny said, "They saved him. These 2 dogs, they're the reason we found him alive." And she meant it. Hours earlier, Danny had been reviewing old case files in the ranger station when she heard the faintest distant howls, repeated, overlapping, not ordinary barking. It was a distress call, unmistakable to someone who'd spent years learning the language of the wild. Sasha and Bruno's voices rang through the canyons like an urgent prayer. She followed it. With the local forest patrol, Danny hiked through the muddy ridges of Devil's Hollow, tracking the barking, until they stumbled across the trail, trampled ground, human prints, and then blood. She knew it was bad, but she also knew Lucas wouldn't have given up without a fight. And he hadn't. Now, hoisted gently onto a stretcher, Lucas reached out a trembling hand. "Sasha, Bruno," he murmured. The 2 dogs immediately approached, pushing their noses into his hand. Danny knelt beside them. "You can ride with him," she whispered, brushing Sasha's head. "You earned it." Inside the emergency vehicle, Lucas lay under layers of thermal blankets, oxygen mask over his face. Sasha curled up beside him on the floor of the truck, pressing her body into his side. Bruno sat watchfully by the door, growling softly at anyone who stepped too close. The medic glanced down at them and smiled. "I've seen trained search dogs, but this is something else." At the hospital, Lucas was rushed into care. Broken ribs, severe dehydration, hypothermia, and a mild concussion. Doctors said that had he been found even an hour later, he might not have survived the night. His internal temperature was dangerously low, and his body had been on the verge of shutting down. While he was treated, Sasha and Bruno remained in the waiting area. Word had already spread through the town. The forest man had been found. Locals brought blankets and food for the dogs. Someone offered hot broth. Others simply came to sit quietly, their faces solemn, their hands folded in hope. The hospital made an exception. Sasha and Bruno were allowed into Lucas's private room, where he finally awoke 2 days later. His vision was still cloudy, but the first thing he saw was Sasha resting her chin on the side of the bed, her amber eyes watching his every breath. He smiled faintly. "You didn't forget me, did you, girl?" She wagged her tail once, and Bruno let out a soft, happy grunt. Tears welled in Lucas's eyes. "You came back." Danny entered quietly. She was holding a file, the incident report, and a freshly brewed cup of black coffee. "Figured you'd want this," she said, setting it on the table beside him. Lucas nodded. "You always knew where to find me." "I had help," she smiled, looking toward the dogs. Then her smile faded. "You know, they didn't just find you. They fought for you, protected you until we got there. I've never seen anything like it." Lucas's voice cracked. "I raised them. Thought I let them go. But I guess love doesn't work like that." "No," Danny whispered. "It doesn't." She sat beside him, resting her hand on his arm. "You've given your life to this forest, to the animals, to people like me. I just hope you know that it's noticed. You're not alone, Lucas. Not anymore." Outside, the hospital window, the storm clouds had cleared. Sunlight filtered through the pines, and though he was still healing, his body bruised, bones aching, Lucas felt a calm settle over him. He was alive, because the forest he had protected for years had protected him back, and at the heart of it all stood 2 muddy, loyal German shepherds who had once been saved by a kind man and had returned to do the same. Echoes in the forest. The forest was never silent. It whispered through the leaves, hummed in the chirps of birds, and told stories with every rustle of undergrowth and creak of timber. Lucas had lived long enough among the trees to understand those voices. But now, as he lay recovering in the hospital bed, with Sasha curled at his feet and Bruno standing guard at the door, the echo he heard most clearly wasn't of wind or rain. It was gratitude, quiet, constant, and overwhelming. In the days that followed his rescue, the small town of Ridgepine wrapped its arms around Lucas like a warm quilt. Cards, flowers, and care packages filled his room. Children from the local school sent drawings, some of Lucas as a superhero in a ranger's hat, others of Sasha and Bruno wearing capes. Even townsfolk who had once been wary of him, the loner in the cabin, the quiet war vet turned forest guardian, now saw him as something more, a symbol of resilience, of loyalty repaid. But for Lucas, the greatest gift was having Sasha and Bruno back by his side. The hospital had planned to keep them in a shelter during his recovery, but Danny, persistent and persuasive, fought to allow them access. "Those dogs saved a human life," she told the board. "They have every right to remain close." They agreed. Every morning, Bruno would rise before sunrise, stretch his large frame beside Lucas's bed, and press his nose gently to Lucas's hand. Sasha would rest against his feet, as if sensing the ache that lingered in his joints. When Lucas struggled to sit up, they flanked him, offering silent encouragement. Their bond wasn't forged in obedience classes or tricks. It was something deeper, ancient, mutual respect, shared trauma, unshakable trust. Lucas remembered the first time he'd met them, 2 half-starved strays digging through trash behind the ranger station during a stormy winter night. Sasha had growled, Bruno had lunged, but when Lucas offered them food and knelt to their level, they hesitated, and then slowly approached. He had no plan to keep them. He already had scars, emotional ones, and the forest was unforgiving. But something about their eyes made him pause. They were survivors, like him, and now, all these years later, they had returned, not as strays, but as saviors. Meanwhile, back in the forest, The case against the poachers unraveled fast. The two captured men confessed quickly. The third, who had fled during the dogs' ambush, was tracked down 2 days later. Ironically, it was another dog, a member of the Ridgepine K9 unit, who sniffed him out in an abandoned hunting cabin. Cold, hungry, and limping, he surrendered without resistance. Investigators uncovered a sprawling web of illegal activity: traps, pelts, hidden storage bunkers. The poachers had been exploiting the forest's most vulnerable for years. Wolves, foxes, even endangered eagles. Lucas had been close to exposing them, and they knew it. That's why they ambushed him, to silence him. But they hadn't expected his silence to be answered by the howls of two forgotten souls, with teeth and courage enough to shake the trees. With evidence gathered and testimony from Lucas and Danny, the poachers were prosecuted swiftly. The town mayor declared a special day in Lucas's honor, Ranger Lucas Day, dedicated to forest preservation and the bond between man and animal. Lucas, however, didn't want speeches or ceremonies. He asked for something else. A week after his discharge, with his arm still in a sling and bruises blooming like storm clouds on his skin, Lucas stood at the edge of the woods once again. Sasha and Bruno flanked him. Danny waited beside her patrol vehicle, watching silently. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Lucas took a breath. The scent of pine, damp soil, and fresh air filled his lungs like medicine. "I need to see it," he said, "where it happened. I need to face it." They hiked slowly, carefully. The trees stood solemn as ever. The forest had cleaned itself, as it always did, washing away signs of the violence that had occurred. But Lucas could still feel it. The tree where he'd been chained still bore the scar where the bolt had been ripped out. He stepped forward and touched the bark. No words, just memory. Sasha sat quietly nearby. Bruno sniffed the soil, then turned his eyes to Lucas, watching, always watching. "This place," Lucas said finally, "tried to kill me, but it also saved me." He dropped to one knee, wincing slightly, and dug his fingers into the earth. "I want to build something here, a marker. Not for me, for them." "You mean the dogs?" Danny asked softly. Lucas nodded. "And for everyone who walks through this forest not knowing that sometimes the wild doesn't just take, sometimes it gives back." Together they began laying stones, a small pile at first, then a larger base. Danny helped gather driftwood and moss, creating a natural monument. At the top, Lucas placed a small wooden plaque, hand-carved back at his cabin. It read, "For Sasha and Bruno, who heard the cry and answered, guardians of the forest, friends to the forgotten." As the wind stirred through the trees, carrying birdsong and the rustle of leaves, Lucas stood between the two dogs who had once been discarded and had become his salvation. And for the first time in years, he felt whole. A new chapter begins. Spring in Ridgepine was unlike anywhere else. The snow melted off the treetops in slow, shimmering droplets. Wildflowers bloomed between fallen logs. Creeks, once frozen and silent, now burbled with life. It was in this renewed world that Lucas took his first real steps toward healing, not just of his body, but of his spirit. Each morning, with Sasha on one side and Bruno on the other, he walked down to the stream behind his cabin. He was still recovering. His ribs ached with every breath. His left shoulder wasn't what it used to be, but every step reminded him that he was alive, that he'd been spared for a reason. Danny came by often now, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with fresh supplies from town, sometimes just to sit with him on the porch and listen to the wind in the trees. "You're quieter than you used to be," she said one morning, sipping from a tin cup as the sun broke over the ridge. Lucas smiled, faintly petting Sasha's head. "I've been thinking more." "About what?" "About what comes next, about what I can still give to this forest." Danny glanced at him. "You don't owe anyone anything, Lucas. You've already given more than most would." That's just it, he replied. I didn't give. I received. He looked out toward the tree line where deer occasionally tiptoed and hawks soared overhead. The forest saved me. These dogs saved me. Even you, stubborn as you are, showed up when it mattered most, she chuckled. You're welcome. But I can't just go back to patrolling trails and writing fines, he continued. It feels small now. I need to do something bigger, something lasting. That something came into focus a week later during a town hall meeting where Lucas had been invited, reluctantly, to speak. He didn't like crowds, he didn't like being seen as a symbol or hero, but he went anyway, with Sasha and Bruno by his side. The hall was packed. Ridgepine's residents stood shoulder to shoulder, many holding photos or stories of their own experiences in the forest. A boy raised his hand and told how he once got lost during a camping trip, and a ranger's voice on the radio brought him back. An elderly woman shared how she'd spotted 2 dogs, a black one and a golden one, standing like statues at the edge of her property weeks ago, watching silently as if ensuring her safety. Lucas stepped up to the microphone, uncomfortable in the spotlight, but clear-eyed. I don't have much to say, he began, his voice gravelly and low. Only that I was given a second chance, and I'd like to spend it building something that outlives me. He paused, placing a hand on Sasha's back. I'm starting a foundation, a sanctuary, really, for injured wildlife, lost dogs, abandoned animals, and maybe a few people who need a place to remember who they are. A quiet hush fell over the room. Lucas looked around. This forest has healed me more times than I can count. I think it's time I help it heal others. The idea bloomed faster than anyone expected. Danny helped him file the paperwork. Volunteers from town pitched in, carpenters, electricians, students from the college who wanted to study wildlife biology. The old ranger station, long abandoned since the budget cuts, was donated by the city council as the first official location. They called it Echo Haven. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a living promise. Lucas oversaw every detail personally. Kennels were built not as cages, but as cottages, open, warm, made of reclaimed wood with soft straw beds. A wildlife rehab area was added, with quiet spaces for injured owls, foxes, even deer. There were walking trails, healing gardens, and most importantly, spaces where veterans, trauma survivors, or just lonely souls could come and feel safe. Word spread, not just in Ridgepine, but beyond. News outlets picked up the story. Former forest ranger saved by dogs creates sanctuary for animals and people. Donations came in. Letters from across the country. One from a woman in Vermont read, "Your story gave me hope. I thought I was alone. Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't forget us." Lucas never sought the attention, but he accepted it if it helped Echo Haven grow. Back at home, life settled into a new rhythm. Sasha and Bruno took on official roles as ambassadors. They greeted visitors, they comforted children. They accompanied Lucas on every walk through the sanctuary, alert and proud. One afternoon, as Lucas watched a family reunite with a lost golden retriever they'd feared gone forever, he felt tears sting his eyes. Not because of sorrow, but because of the overwhelming fullness in his chest. He knelt beside Sasha, who was watching the reunion with calm eyes. "You brought me back, girl," he whispered. "And now, look what we've built." Bruno let out a low chuff of agreement, his tail wagging slowly. That night, under a moonlit sky, Lucas sat by the fire pit outside his cabin. The stars stretched overhead in a great, quiet canopy. The dogs lay on either side of him, and for a long while, no one spoke, because nothing needed to be said. The forest had taken him to the brink, had almost swallowed him whole. But love, fierce, loyal, and unexpected, had pulled him back. Shadows fade, hearts mend. It was just past dusk when the visitor arrived. Lucas was locking up Echo Haven's main gate for the evening when headlights crept up the gravel road. A beat-up pickup truck came to a slow stop. From it stepped a young man, early 20s, thin, with deep circles under his eyes, and a cautious way of moving, like someone used to being unseen. Sasha and Bruno, resting nearby, stood but didn't bark. They sensed something different in him, not danger, just hurt. The man took off his cap. "Is this the place where the ranger lives?" he asked. Lucas nodded. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Evan," he said. "I was in the woods that night." "The one your dogs found you—" "I saw something. I should have done more. I'm sorry." Lucas studied him. Something in his voice rang with remorse, not rehearsed, but real. Evan swallowed. "I was with them at first. The poachers. My uncle runs that crew. I didn't know what they were doing at first. Then I saw you chained up, saw those dogs fighting to protect you. I ran. I was scared." Lucas didn't speak, just opened the gate. "Come in," he said quietly. Inside, Evan sat by the fire pit, shoulders hunched. "I couldn't sleep. Not. After that, I came back, been living out of my truck. I didn't know how to make it right." Lucas looked at the flickering flames, then at Sasha and Bruno, lying calmly by Evan's feet. "You just did," Lucas said, "by coming here." For a moment there was silence. Then Lucas stood. "You want to help? There's always work to do." Evan looked up. "You'd let me stay?" Lucas offered a small nod. "This place is for anyone ready to start over." Over the following weeks, Evan became part of Echo Haven. He learned to care for the animals, helped mend fences, and eventually found his voice again. The dogs grew to trust him. Sasha even began sleeping outside his bunkhouse door. One day, while feeding the fox kits, Evan turned to Lucas and asked, "Why didn't you turn me in?" Lucas replied simply, "Because someone gave me a second chance too. His name was Bruno, and her name was Sasha." Evan smiled, the first real smile Lucas had seen on him. The shadows of the past didn't vanish in a day. But in this quiet forest sanctuary, hearts mended slowly, softly, under the watchful eyes of two dogs who knew what it meant to fight for life. And for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt like home. When the storm returned, the storm rolled in without warning. Thick clouds swallowing the stars, wind howling like the cries of the forest itself. It was the first big one since the night Lucas had nearly died, and it brought memories with it. As rain pounded the tin roof of the cabin, Lucas sat by the fire, Sasha's head resting on his lap. Bruno paced occasionally, alert and uneasy. Neither dog liked storms, neither did Lucas anymore. The thunder cracked so loud it seemed to split the trees in half. Sasha flinched. Lucas instinctively wrapped an arm around her. "You still remember too, huh?" he whispered. Outside, the power flickered. Evan appeared in the doorway with a flashlight, soaked to the bone but calm. "There's a tree down near the rehab pens," he said. "I think we should check it before the creek floods." Lucas grabbed his coat without hesitation. In the rain, Sasha and Bruno led the way, weaving like shadows through the underbrush. They reached the fallen tree just in time. It had crushed part of the fence. One of the young deer inside was trying to squeeze through the broken wire. Lucas moved fast, guiding the frightened animal back, while Bruno stood guard and Sasha blocked its path to the rushing creek. In the chaos of lightning and mud, the three of them, man and dogs, worked like a single soul. When it was over, when the deer was safe and the fence reinforced, Lucas stood in the rain and let the cold wash over him. He wasn't afraid anymore because he knew, no matter the storm, he wasn't alone. A legacy of loyalty months passed, and Echo Haven grew into something more than Lucas had ever imagined. The sanctuary became a haven not only for animals but for people too, those in need of healing, of second chances, just like him. Veterans, families struggling with loss, and those in search of peace all found a home in the quiet forest. One sunny afternoon, Lucas stood by the stream, Sasha and Bruno at his side. He watched as a group of children played in the shallow waters, laughing as one of them tried to wade through with a dog, a young golden retriever they'd adopted from Echo Haven. It was a scene he never could have envisioned when he was chained. And to that tree, gasping for breath in the rain, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Danny, her smile as bright as the sun filtering through the trees. "You did it, you know," she said softly. "You turned your pain into something beautiful." Lucas glanced over at her, his voice quiet but firm. "We did it. All of us," she nodded. "The dogs, the people, the forest. It was always meant to be." Sasha barked softly, tail wagging, while Bruno leaned into Lucas's side. The bond between them, built on loyalty, love, and sacrifice, had shaped more than just this sanctuary. It had shaped Lucas's soul. His journey had been long, painful, but as he watched the children run, laughing and free, he knew that the forest had given him something far greater than survival. It had given him a legacy of love and loyalty that would live on long after the storm had passed. The full-circle winter crept back into the forest, bringing a soft dusting of snow that clung to the branches like whispered secrets. The stillness of the season settled over Echo Haven, but the sanctuary, now well-established and flourishing, continued its quiet work. Lucas stood on the porch of his cabin, bundled in a thick coat. Sasha and Bruno sat beside him, their breath rising in puffs of mist. The world was serene, but there was a new weight in the air, a sense that they were all finally home. It was then that a car pulled up the long driveway, its tires crunching over the snow. Lucas recognized the figure immediately. Evan stepped out looking different, taller, straighter, and with a new light in his eyes. "Hey, Lucas," Evan called out, a hesitant smile crossing his face. Lucas didn't hesitate. He met him halfway. "You're looking good, kid," Lucas said, clapping him on the shoulder. Evan laughed softly. "I've learned a lot since I got here, about work, about life." Behind Evan, a small trailer was hitched to the truck. It wasn't much, but it was his. "I've got a new place," Evan said, his voice steady. "Thought I could use some space to work on what I've learned here. I want to help the next group of people who come through. So, I'm starting something. Of my own." Lucas smiled. "I'll always be here if you need help." Evan looked down at Sasha and Bruno. "You're right. You always will be." The two dogs trotted over, wagging their tails. Without hesitation, they leaned into Evan, their acceptance a quiet blessing. In that moment, the circle was complete. From pain, through healing, and now with a future ahead, and the legacy of loyalty, of love would continue. The true gift of home as the weeks passed. Winter's grip slowly loosened, and the promise of spring began to unfold across Echo Haven. The snow melted away, revealing the vibrant green of the earth beneath. Animals returned to the fields, and the trees stood tall once again, their branches thick with the weight of fresh buds. It was as if the entire forest had exhaled, breathing life back into the sanctuary. But for Lucas, the changes in the landscape were nothing compared to the transformations that had occurred within the hearts of those who came through Echo Haven's gates. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Lucas sat outside, watching the sky turn to gold. Sasha lay by his feet, and Bruno rested his head on his paws beside him. The air was crisp but full of warmth, the kind that only comes when peace settles into the soul. Evan was in the barn, working on repairs to the animal shelters. Danny was visiting with a local group of students, teaching them about the importance of wildlife conservation. Everything felt right, but Lucas knew there was still one more thing left for him to do, a final piece of the puzzle that had brought him to this point. A gift he had promised to give to the forest, to the dogs, to the people who had walked beside him in the darkest hours of his life. That night, as the first stars blinked into existence above the trees, Lucas made his way to the edge of the forest. The dogs followed closely, knowing exactly where they were headed. They'd done this before. The tree where it had all begun, the one that had almost taken his life, stood tall against the backdrop of the night sky. It had become more than just a painful memory. It had become the symbol of his survival, of everything he had fought for. He reached up and placed his hand against its bark, the rough texture grounding him, reminding him of his journey. "Thank you," he whispered softly. The words meant not just for the tree, but for everything the forest had given him, the strength to survive, the courage to rebuild, and the love that had carried him through it all. Sasha nudged his side gently, as if urging him to continue. Bruno sat down beside him, a quiet, watchful presence. "I'm not alone anymore," Lucas said, more to himself than anyone else. "And I never will be again." There, under the canopy of stars and the protective arms of the forest, Lucas made his promise. He would never forget. He would honor the life he had been given, and he would ensure that those who came to Echo Haven would carry the same light, the same hope into the world. A new beginning. The years passed, and Echo Haven flourished, becoming a beacon of hope for animals and people alike. The sanctuary wasn't just a place, it was a community, a family. People from all walks of life came to find solace in the forest, to learn about the delicate balance between humans and nature, to heal alongside the animals who had once been broken. Lucas, now older but still as dedicated as ever, stood in front of the sanctuary one bright morning, his heart full of gratitude. Sasha, still as protective as ever, sat at his feet, her eyes watching every movement. Bruno, always by his side, rested near the entrance, keeping a quiet vigil over the land they had all worked so hard to protect. In the distance, Evan was teaching a group of young volunteers about animal care, his voice steady and confident. Danny was at the information booth, welcoming new visitors to the sanctuary with a smile that could light up the darkest day. It had all come full circle. What had once been a place of pain and survival had transformed into something entirely new, a place of love, of growth, and of purpose. And at the center of it all stood the dogs, the two German shepherds who had saved Lucas's life, who had shown him that love was the strongest force in the world. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape, Lucas stood, with his hand resting on Sasha's head, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet. He took a deep breath, letting the quiet hum of nature fill his senses. "This is it," he whispered. "This is home." The forest had taken so much from him, but in the end, it had given him everything he needed to rebuild. And now, with Echo Haven standing tall, he knew it wasn't just about saving animals anymore. It was about saving souls, human and animal alike. Lucas looked at the camera Danny had set up nearby. She'd suggested that one day he should share his story, share the journey that had brought him here, with the world. It was time. As he stepped into the frame, Sasha and Bruno standing proudly beside him, he smiled warmly. "If you've followed our journey, thank you. If you've been inspired by our story, we hope it's given you hope. But it's not just about us. It's about all of us and what we can do when we come together." He paused, his voice steady. "Please, like and subscribe to our channel to continue following the journey of Echo Haven, where hope, healing, and love never stop growing." Sasha barked. Bruno wagged his tail, and for the first time in his life, Lucas truly believed that everything he had worked for, everything he had fought for, was exactly where it was meant to be, and in the heart of that forest, with the wind rustling through the trees and the dogs at his side, Lucas knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you've been moved by our story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to build a place where love, healing, and second chances are always possible.